Welcome back to another episode of The Hip. My name is James Layton, CEO and founder of Anderson James. This is the podcast where every single week I bring you a leader from our sector to discuss some of the biggest challenges in UK housing today. Today I was delighted to be joined by Katie Fisher, Divisional Managing Director at McCarthy Stone. We talk about Katie's journey and the transition from healthcare, what drew her towards McCarthy Stone and their values and vision, how we changed the perception of retirement living and how important community is in the sector, and what more we can do to attract more women to the sector. Katie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much.
As I always like to start this, would you mind, just for the listeners' benefit, just giving us a bit of an introduction to yourself, please?
Of course. So I'm Katie Fisher. I'm 49 years old and I am the Divisional Managing Director for the Midlands division for McCarthy Stone.
Nice. And the first thing I suppose we'll start with is the helicopter view as it is today, McCarthy Stone, as a business or in your area. Just give us a little bit of an overview of the business.
Yeah, so McCarthy Stone is the leading developer and provider of retirement communities within the UK. And what that means, it makes us slightly different than what you might imagine, because we don't simply build retirement properties. We actually we're that confident in our product, we stay responsible for delivering services for our customers. So, for example, right now we have approximately 22,000 customers. Not only are we responsible for looking after and supporting the communities they live in, but just some high-level stats, we provide 500,000 care hours per year, 1 million meals per year. So we're in it for the long game. This really is about our passion and our purpose. So our purpose is championing the role of wellbeing and happiness of older people in society, and that really, we kind of walk the walk as well as talk the talk around that.
Yeah, I love that. And has that always been the business strategy? Or is that a recent thing? Because I know that you've always looked after the end-to-end life cycle, but clearly, where does that transition and how far do those services go? Could you give us an overview of kind of what things you do in terms of looking after people in those developments?
So the joy of what we do is that it's really driven entirely by the customer, so it's a really customer-centric model. So it's not a one-size-fits-nobody. We have a range of different types of services that are all entirely optional, that customers can buy into as and when they need them. So they go from all aspects of domestic or cleaning services through to personal care, support, befriending, that they can be anything, and they can stop and start depending on, so a great example would be if someone has family who are away for a period of time and actually they need some additional support whilst the family's away, then it's incredibly flexible and responsive and tailored at an individual level. But that sort of wraps up into those kind of care hours. And then from a meals point of view, because it's really important to make the distinction, we are absolutely not a care home by another name. This is absolutely independent living. People have their own beautiful apartments. They can be entirely self-sufficient, not have any interest or support from us, or they can pick and choose. They come and eat in the restaurant if they wish to, depending on the type of property it is that their home is in, where they can meet with friends, they can meet with family, they can host events for themselves or with other homeowners. So it really is very flexible, but it's aimed at the kind of strapline of life well lived. And actually, lots of homeowners that I talk to, they say they have a much more vibrant social life than they did in the 10 years before moving into one of the communities.
Oh, amazing! That's incredible. And what's the ideal homeowner for you? Kind of, is there a range? Is there an age bracket? Is there a part of life, or is it any part?
So we have two different main types of development we think that suit people with different needs. So our retirement living is for people from 60 and upwards. And that is really the idea around that is you have your own entirely independent apartment within that environment, but the communal areas, gardens, maintenance around the building itself is sorted out for you, so you don't have to worry about it. You can just get on with living life. But then we have retirement living plus Plus, which is for people 70 and plus.
Okay.
Same offering, absolutely fully independent if you wish to. I think the phrase we try and use is friends nearby and help whenever you need it. That's kind of, but it's you choose. There's no kind of enforced fun or activity around this. But the Retirement Living Plus has an on-site restaurant, a bistro, which has full restaurant a la carte service. So, you can pick and choose what you want, when you want, and just turn up like with family or friends. If you want to host an event, they have private dining facilities. But then there's also this drop-down menu of choosing from, cleaning support, other aspects of domestic care, washing, ironing, that type of thing, through to personal care, support with medication, really whatever you want or need. It's entirely driven by you.
Amazing. And I obviously looked into your background, and clearly this is the first time you've stepped into this world, albeit when you describe it, actually, it's not as different as it may seem. But how have you found the transition into housing and into this retirement living sector?
Well, I've been absolutely privileged. I have an incredibly inspiring boss in the chief exec here, John Tomkiss. He was the one who sort of persuaded me that this would be, a fantastic opportunity to come in and join the business at this time. And he's absolutely right. So it's not been so much challenges, but I guess this comes on to really my reflections is, as women, we tend to try and focus on the things that we can't do. So, when I initially started thinking about this job, I looked at the person specification and thought, wow, I don't have any experience in the top 3 items on this person specification. Maybe we should stop before we start. But actually what the organisation encouraged me to do is think about, what my skill set is. And actually, what I have is 28 years experience of really strong operational management experience. I'm very confident managing projects within complex programs that are large, big, building new hospitals, that type of thing that I was involved in, and managing people excellently so that they can give of their best. And those things are utterly transferable, and managing a division within this business, it's the same job, just different sector and industry. And okay, I don't have the sector experience, and I don't have some of the technical knowledge, although I am becoming a complete crane geek. I know a lot about cranes now, but I don't have that knowledge. But I am surrounded by totally brilliant teammates and colleagues who have years and years and years and years of experience with that. So the last thing they need is me having that experience. What I can bring is something different.
Yeah, and I suppose the ethos of the business is very much around customer care, looking after people, making sure that that's the paramount thing. But what have you found some of the challenges of moving industries? Because I often tell leaders, you can move industries. It's not a difficult thing to do because you're managing people that are experts. But what have been some of the things that you've been conscious to plug and make sure you have around you to try and transition?
It's sort of that imposter syndrome, isn't it? There's an awful lot of us who have that gremlin, and that's live and kicking for me at the moment, sitting on my shoulder saying, well, who decided this was a good idea for you to do this? Because there's all this stuff you don't know. But I think the 3 things I've learned really, really clearly with any leadership role, certainly within my previous roles as chief exec in the health sector, is the job is to create an environment where you recruit and retain really brilliantly talented people who are all better than you in their own right, in their chosen field. The second is to create the environment in which they can play nicely. And the third is to act as this big umbrella that can shield from some of the non-value adding activity that allows that team to develop and perform as a high performing team and get on with the job, and really execute very clearly the strategy that we have to execute. So, that's really, the job in a nutshell. But the challenge is the imposter syndrome. It's the gremlin that says, oh, crikey, I don't know what I don't know. How do you ask questions in that environment? How do you know if someone's trying to pull the wool over your eyes? But I just think being really honest and authentic about that, and actually, create an environment of trust where people will challenge you and say, no, do you know what? You're on completely the wrong path there, Fisher. Let's come back in and think again. That's fun. As long as you create that environment, you can address those challenges. So
and I think I said offline, one of the reasons we do this podcast is to encourage more people to get into our sector from a starting point, but more people to transition. I'm a big believer that we need a diversity of skills, leadership. If we just keep the same people at the top of organisations, we'll continue to do the same things. There'll be no evolution. But and we'll probably jump around a little bit here. But you mentioned about women generally look at a job description and think about what they can do, and generally men would look at a job description and think, well, I can do all those things. So how do we encourage more women to have the confidence to make those steps in their career and actually think, I'm going to have the confidence to throw myself into this, even though I can't do everything? Because I think that's a really relevant point.
I think it's far more about, what are you recruiting for? So I've learned over the years that you'll have a much more successful candidate in post if you're recruiting for values that are aligned with your vision, values and purpose as an organisation, and then trying to describe a role or person spec in terms of the types of experiences that are going to be beneficial or useful in the new role. Because actually, when I saw the job description for this job, it was like, development processes, construction types, all that kind of stuff. Is like, well, I don't know any of that. But actually, when I started having those conversations with John, the chief exec, and he was saying, well, actually, these are big operational jobs, and there's lots of projects that are, 18 months through to 4 years in duration, complex budgetary people, planning, multiple agency type of negotiations, and that has to sit within a even more complex program where actually your job is to manage to time, to budget, retaining the best caliber people who are motivated and valued to do a great job. He could have said that about my last 10 jobs.
Of course.
It's the same job. Same job. So I think it's the language we use, and really therefore the partnerships we develop right at the earliest stages of recruitment is to articulate a role in such a way that it gives you the greatest opportunity and diversity of applications, and is inclusive in a description of what you're looking for as an organisation, I think.
Yeah, and we'll come back to that because I've got quite a bit on the women in construction piece. But just to go back to McCarthy Stone at the moment, could you just talk us through their sort of main aims as a business? So when you met John, what did he tell you? What was the kind of vision, and what was the thing that he said, this is our aim as a business and this is what we're going to be known for, famous for, I suppose?
So he had me right at the first line, which was around the purpose. So our purpose is championing the role, well-being and happiness of older people in society. So I have spent the first 30 years of my career seeing what happens when older people crash land really badly into health services, and then really have very, very poor outcomes and experiences as a consequence. So, those aren't just words that sit in a book. I have seen it's kind of the lifeblood and the drumbeat, if you like, of the organisation is at its heart is this focus on creating a life well lived for older people, whether that's through our development business, whether it's through our services business, or whether it's through our foundation. The company set up a charitable foundation which awards grants to grassroots charities focused solely on promoting that purpose for older people at a local level. So these aren't big high grand gestures. They're like funding for lunch clubs for people with dementia in local villages and communities, that type of thing. So this is what I mean about walk the walk and talk the talk. So he had me right at the outset around that because who wouldn't want to be part of that? And actually, whether it was being a chief exec of hospitals trying to keep people well and managing complex long-term conditions, or whether it's about creating really vibrant retirement communities where people are not lonely and they have the opportunity to do great things, not worry about the things that we all have to worry about right in our lives that are but you shouldn't have to when you get to your later years. You should be really focused on enjoying the well-earned later years, having committed and contributed so much into society in their working lives.
Couldn't agree more. And it's a sector growing and will continue to grow, and it's a fantastic time to be firstly the leader in it, but secondly to create innovation of where that product goes. One thing I had a question about is kind of how bespoke can you make properties? So clearly people have different needs at different ages, and I was part of a modular business that were looking at kind of hot and cold taps and different things for different needs. But how far can you go from that bespoke nature of your build process?
Yeah, so I mean, bespoke has a number of layers to it. So within our developments, the way that we ensure consistency and quality in our builds is to standardize those buildings, to make sure we get really, really good at building them, and that defects or challenges that homeowners might then experience are really reduced to a minimum. So there's that. But actually, I think what you're asking is these aren't like mainstream apartment blocks, and you're right, they're absolutely not. But the distinction is between things like the retirement living option we spoke about and retirement living plus. So retirement living plus is really aimed at what we would describe as age in place. So when you move in, it's a really beautiful high-end apartment, which is a really lovely, lovely place to create your home. But as you get older, if there's a requirement for more care input, more support, things like the call alarm system, you know,
That's what I was
24/7, you've
thinking.
got access to care and support if you need it. You know, the accessible communal spaces, the buggy stores that the developments have, so that, you know, if you've got mobility needs, they can be supported. And really importantly, the choice of location of our sites. You know, we are very, very clearly focused on redeveloping brownfield sites, town centre sites, you know, areas for regeneration, but which are close to local amenities. So actually they enable people to live well, even with increasingly more restricted mobility issues. You know, they still don't have to suffer that social exclusion or loneliness that might be living in their own, you know, 3-4 bedroom property out in the village with really no opportunity to interact with others.
Yeah, and how do we? I've been thinking about this quite a lot before we spoke, but how do we change the perception of this industry? Because, you know, growing up, being honest, I had grandparents, parents that had bad experience from the care system, and therefore you have a warped perception potentially, or I do anyway. But I think this plugs a really lovely gap in the marketplace, but I still think there's a little bit of work to do around changing the perception. How can we do that to put a more positive emphasis on how this product sits in society to make it more appealing and to continue to grow it as it will naturally?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. You know, actually, a lot of people have heard McCarthy Stone, but they don't actually understand what retirement living is. And some people might, you know, very, you know, easily make the mistake that it's part of the care industry, which it absolutely isn't. I think our best ambassadors are the homeowners themselves. You know, we have some fabulous stories, you know, where genuinely most of the homeowners I meet and talk to, they have enviable social lives. They have great networks and friends. You know, we have a system within McCarthy Stone where each of the developments has a guest suite, and actually if you're a homeowner you can book into any of the guest suites in any of our 500 developments anywhere in the country. So, you know, the holiday opportunities with friends and all that kind of stuff. So I just think the story tells itself, actually, if we can get more direct access for people who are living in communities and living their best lives. So I think it's just plugging away at that. You know, there's no point having some kind of highly polished marketed messaging around it, because actually if you sit and just talk to our homeowners, they will tell you much more authentically than I could or anyone else could about what it means to lose the worry of having to grow older in a large property where you're responsible for all aspects of its upkeep and maintenance and all the bills and all that kind of stuff. But also it's so easy to have friends if that's what you want. You know, they're there, right there, when they've got the same aspirations and aims as you have.
Yeah, and there's that sense of belonging that's so important, and reconnecting. So in some cases, reconnecting. So you mentioned about social isolation, and when I did some research about this, there's a massive issue around this social isolation. Could you just talk to us around kind of the effects of this in society and how that is impacting people?
So this is something that is very dear to my heart from obviously, you know, my experience of working in the health industry. So there's lots of interesting research emerging now that is actually making quite startling connections between loneliness and the rapid progression of symptoms of dementia, for example. So there's a direct causal link, and one study that I'm familiar with says there's a 40% increase in the onset of dementia symptoms as a direct consequence of loneliness or social exclusion. So not only is it, you know, morally and ethically not what we want for people who've contributed so much already in society to this point, but actually from an economical point of view, you know, loneliness is not living life well, and it's not growing old well. So actually whatever we can do societally in our own local nuclear families, or, you know, for us as a business in terms of providing these great communities where we can just combat at the source this issue of social isolation, will have a profound impact on the health and well-being of older people in society. But we need to talk about that more, you know, because I think we could all cite, you know, I'm a carer to my dad, who I love deeply, but is fiercely, you know, anchored to living alone in a rural location in a house that's far too big for him, despite the fact that that's increasingly difficult for him with every year that passes. So how do we really unlock that so that it's not me trying to persuade my dad to say, actually, do you know what, Dad, you'd be so much happier in a different environment, but for him really seeing and understanding, how this would massively benefit him. So that's work that we're currently working on, really, really hard within McCarthy Stone, through the work of the foundation, through the work that John, our chief exec, does, lobbying, having this committee for older people is something that's really important with that, looking at, alternative living arrangements. It's not a one size fits all. It's complex and it's very entrenched. So there's a lot to be done. The last thing, I know I've waffled on a lot with that answer, but the last thing I'd say that McCarthy Stone are really trying to do to address this is make the type of communities that we provide more accessible to a wider proportion of society. So partnerships we're doing with housing associations like Anchor, where we will provide and develop a scheme for Anchor and a scheme for ourselves in the same location, creates really great environments accessible for a much greater proportion of society. The partnership work that we've done with Homes England to get the grant that means that we can bring shared ownership into play for those who meet certain thresholds, so that actually these types of developments are more affordable for a greater proportion of society, either to buy or our multi-tenure options to rent or part rent, part buy. So that's the thing, is trying every possible angle and every strand to get people to see this as a viable alternative to living increasingly worried alone in your family home.
I was going to ask you about affordability, because yes, you do need different tenures, different people, like different affordability options. So that's great. And like, I feel that from experience of caring for someone, I feel that there's a stubbornness to not wanting to move out, and and like you say, like if I had mentioned this at the time, I'm not going into care. No, it's not care. It's just some assisted care. But anyway, I think that's one of the things. And what's the way that McCarthy Stone are tackling the current cost of living? We talked about the affordability elements, but some of these, if I just think about my granddad, he lived in a massive rural house, and he would have been paying all the bills, all the electricity, everything at that time. Though not the most affordable thing to do. What are you doing to try and tackle some of those things? The energy crisis, the cost of living crisis.
So all kinds of things. I mean, the first thing to say is that all of our buildings that are designed and developed are designed with the utmost of energy efficiency in mind. So the buildings are much more efficient. They are much more thermally insulated. They're designed specifically in that way to be not only compliant but exceeding the very latest in regulations in all of these different type of areas. Our services business, supported by procurement teams, have forward bought lots of energy to try and fix a lot of the energy costs for homeowners, particularly within the communal areas, this kind of service charge aspect of the buildings that we face. So it's literally a daily focus of everything we do. I think it would be safe to say it's providing cost certainty, because obviously everything is all managed and you can plan accordingly around that. But it's also using our purchasing power as a much bigger business to do things like forward purchase energy, which means that everybody gets a better deal as a consequence. And then the economies of scale around care provision, provision of restaurants and this, that, and the other. So meals and things can be provided at a significantly, cheaper sort of way than if you were sort of going to a restaurant on the high street.
Yeah, cool.
Like that. So it's not one thing, but it's a consistent focus all day, every day.
Yeah, of course.
We can do that.
The one thing I saw from a build perspective, if I'm right, is that you did some partnership with Sigmat in terms of looking at MMC, and I'm a massive advocate on the podcast of MMC because it allows us to be more eco-friendly and a little bit more like I'm doing. I've got Octopus Energy on the podcast next week, and they've got a zero bills product for the housing market that they're launching, and that's fascinating to think that that's even possible, but I'm sure there's some technology that sits behind all of that. But how have you found that MMC process, and what do you think the impact of MMC can be to the need that we've got within this sector?
So enormous, really, as you say, not only from a sustainability piece, but also from a repeatability. So I think from our earliest pilots around MMC, what we've learned is actually defects, up after the event are reduced by as much as 50%. The buildings are drier, they're warmer. So because the tolerances are much, much smaller, from traditional build methods. So we are really pushing on light gauge steel frame as a particular modern method of construction. We have an ambition and a target to make sure all of our developments, 25%, can and should be built initially through using light gauge steel frame. You might think, well, that doesn't sound that many, but the technology, we've got a partnership, as you say, with Sigmat, and we're innovating continually to work out what the art of the possible is. But we know that we can confidently deliver high quality in a repeatable way for buildings that are 4 stories or more, largely with a flat roof. So we sometimes have to deviate from those types of environments because of planning conditions, planning restrictions.
Of course.
We touched on before about the nature of, we look for brownfield sites close to town centre amenities. So therefore we do have to be mindful of the planning sensitivities around some of those sites. So that's why it's 25% now, but that gives us more than enough to get on with Sigmat. In fact, I was in their factory in Leeds on Thursday last week. As part of my learning, I was learning all about hot rolled steel, cold rolled steel, hot dipped cold rolled steel, and all the different uses and applications. It's a huge commitment from both Sigmat and McCarthy Stone to work in partnership to innovate, to make sure that this becomes the norm for us moving forward. But at the moment we get to 25% first, and certainly in the Midlands we've got 4 or 5 developments that are various stages of the planning process at the moment that we fully intend to build out using light gauge steel frame, 2 of which start in the first half of this calendar year. So
amazing. And I read something, I was doing some research about the shortage. So like in the housing sector, clearly there's a massive shortage of houses. It feels like that's exactly the same in retirement living, from a huge shortage. What are you seeing from a customer demand perspective? And secondly, how can we fix that? I mean, we might have just answered one of those questions because MMC might speed up the delivery of said buildings. But what are some of the challenges you're seeing? And I suppose what can we do to try and remedy some of those things? Because there's supply chain issues, there's speed issues, there's land availability, there's quite a few things.
There are. I mean, a lot of them are surmountable. I think, from my vast 9-month experience, obviously, in this industry, I'd suggest one of my reflections of one of the biggest rate limiting steps is actually the planning process. The planning system, and this would be the same for any mainstream builder, it is massively overloaded. Others with more experience than me might say it's broken in terms of how the planning system works. But we can, that's our biggest constraining factor. We can acquire land. Our development and build process, is, as I say, we've been doing it for 40 years, so we kind of, know what works and what doesn't. But actually getting the right conversations with the right parties around a local planning authority, actually getting it to a point where we can get it to committee, it is a real challenge, and in some parts of the country that's exacerbated. So issues of nutrient neutrality, for example, in the areas where that's an issue, can delay the planning process by another 2 years. So it does feel like that's the single biggest rate limiting step at the moment, and I think it's as much of a frustration for local planning authorities as it is for us. And there are great examples where we're working really effectively in partnership with planners to help, and we've got some great examples in the patch of having achieved planning consents quite quickly, but there are some that are years in the making, and so that's always going to be a constraining factor, and not assisted, because obviously that's highly politicized, and there is still a very live and kicking section of society around NIMBYism. So our developments out of necessity need to be of a certain size to create vibrant communities. It's not really much of a community if there's only 3 apartments, So you need to have a level of scale in order to create that community, to really get to the heart of what we're trying to do, which is combat that social isolation and allow the well-being and happiness of older people in those communities to really, really flourish. So that's a constant battle, in terms of scale and mass and planning sensitivities, and so I think that's the biggest constraining factor for us. We are in an extremely fortunate position in that we were acquired by Lone Star a couple of years ago, so actually being able to secure the capital to invest in really good quality land in great locations it is not the rate limiting step for us. We're in a very fortunate position to be backed by such forward-thinking owners. But as I say, the biggest bottleneck for us at the moment is around planning.
Yeah, and the same for everyone. I think if I had £1 for every time someone had said planning as one of the challenges, I think there's a real under-resourced nature to planning at the moment, isn't there? Which is one of the challenges. But the other thing is that we're going to have to somehow free up more land and free up the planning process. Otherwise, we're going to get worse and worse and worse at delivering much needed housing, much needed retirement living. It's a fact, I think. And
the thing about retirement living, which is what again, this is something probably that is, fresh pair of eyes, or lack of knowledge or experience, but for retirement living, it's a virtuous circle, so it's not like a greenfield site where we're looking to build a new, I don't know, 2,000 or 3,000 homes.
No, of course.
By building a retirement community, we're freeing up existing housing stock to enable other people to get onto the housing ladder. So it's kind of 1 in, 1 out, or 1 in, 1 out, 4 in. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah,
so
of course.
If the average person moving into one of our properties, say, is in a 3-bedroom semi-detached house, then that 3-bedroom semi-detached could possibly house a family of 4. So it's a virtuous circle. There's no downside around it. So not only do we create increased capacity around retirement living, we free up housing stock for those trying to enter into the housing ladder and families trying to create family homes.
Yeah, it's such a good point. And like you said, then we don't need to build as many homes.
No, exactly. It's a double win.
It's a double win, yeah. And we touched on it before, but I really wanted to get into women in construction. Yeah. So something that I'm crazily passionate about is we do need to create more women in the sector. And I'm not just talking from, so you've got a couple of angles that you can attack this on, but not just leadership, right? Leadership's really important, and I really want to push that. But how do we get more site managers? How do we get more people into the roles that you don't see women occupy? Because, I went to a college to do a talk, I don't know, 3-4 months ago, 1 woman in the class of the whole college in construction. And I thought, this is getting worse. It's not getting any better. It's getting worse. So I suppose, how do we get more women involved would be my first question, and quite a big question. And do we have to accept that women don't want to do some of those roles? One of the questions. But surely we've moved on a little bit now in terms of the diversity of roles we can offer in our organisations that can interest more women to the sector. So what's your thoughts 9 months into our sector, but you've seen it in the NHS and how it can be done?
So I'm gonna talk about Lexi, if that's okay in this, because Lexi is a real person rather than talking hypothetically. So I haven't asked her permission, so I'm sure she won't mind. So Lexi is an absolutely stunning and fiercely strong woman who is an assistant site manager, really just on the cusp of being able to take the next step. She's fabulous. She will go as far as she wants to within the construction industry, I have no doubt. And so when I think of Lexi, I think actually, she was lucky, because I guess she came from a family where, this industry was in the family's blood, and so she sort of was going out with, her family and all that kind of stuff to get experience from quite a young age. And so what that would suggest to me is we need to myth bust much earlier on. Everybody's got their own perceptions or prejudices about every career, haven't they? I mean, everybody. If I were to say to you nursing, you would immediately flash into your mind what you think nursing is, and probably some of it will be right, but most of it won't be. So it's the same for construction and site management, because actually the reason Lexi is so fabulous at what she does is because her eye for detail, her tenacity, her focus, her determination of the more someone says to her something can't be done, the more she sets out to prove that it can. So it's not focusing on mud and PPE and cold and rain and this, that and the other. It's actually no 2 days at work are the same. You go in and you've got all these kind of really interesting challenges to solve, thinking of new and creative ways to address challenges, and you get to do that through great team working, talking to lots of really great experienced people who've got lots and lots and lots of knowledge, and there's a really great sense of team and a feeling of solving those problems, and then at the end of the day handing the keys over to an absolutely fabulous development that is at the core championing the role, wellbeing and happiness of older people. So it's that connectivity, isn't it? It's actually And I go right back to, because this is something really resonated for me, the story, which I know is very overplayed, but when someone went into NASA and there was a janitor cleaning the floor and someone asked him what he was doing and he said he was helping to put a man on the moon. It's that kind of thing. Actually, this isn't about women in construction, bricklaying or this, that, and the other. Actually, we're helping to create beautiful homes that allow us to fulfill our purpose. So for McCarthy Stone, that's championing the role, wellbeing and happiness of older people. You can tell I like that purpose. That's why I bang on about it so much. But whatever that is, it's the end game, isn't it? That's what's going to capture these young minds, because it's not about particular tasks. Because actually, I would defy anyone, even those people who say they love their job and it's not like a job and isn't it amazing. There's one element, at least, of their job they don't like doing. So you're always going to have a job where there are bits that you don't like and there are bits that you really, really, really love. And the trick of a successful career is to find a job that closely matches more of the stuff that you do like and less of the stuff that you don't. So I think it's breaking down those prejudices, storytelling, about actually, well, a life as an assistant site manager or site manager is this, actually, crikey, in an environment where, there's massive supply-demand gap around housing, you're going to have career certainty here. There's always going to be a job for you. It's those kind of things that you have the opportunity, as I say, to make a lasting impact in terms of local communities, because actually the buildings that you build and are responsible for are going to be there for ages. It's tapping into those kind of positive motivations rather than focusing on, well, it's going to be rainy and it's going to be cold and you're going to have to wear, boots and high-vis jackets. And, it's just not what interests people. It's about, I think, when we say people aren't engaged or they don't want to do this, it's just that I think it's a bit lazy and a bit sloppy. It just means we haven't engaged. We haven't found a way to engage with someone that allows them to connect with us, and that's on us, not on them. So it's exactly the same with nursing. There's just not enough people in this country who want to go into nursing, but that's on us. We have not engaged with people in such a way for them to want to be part of that gang, if you like.
Yeah, and it's so true. And one of the observations I've had, and I've done quite a lot of work around this, is I used to work for a business called Wilmot Dixon, fantastic business, and they championed, and not just championed, they made themselves accountable, I felt, in bringing more women through their trainee graduate scheme, because if you're in an interview situation, you're looking for a site manager and that person doesn't have site management experience, well, you're unlikely to hire them based on that. And we've got to break the stigma, and I think we can do that through next gen careers in terms of apprenticeships, trainee schemes. But the thing that I think we don't do well enough is make ourselves accountable for those decisions and put actual tangible numbers against it to say, well, actually, we're going to commit X% of our staff at this level are going to be... Because I think what people do is, unfortunately, is they make the numbers work for their narrative. And so rather than tackle the site management issue, I'm probably generalising, but tackle the site management issue, they say, but we've got 20% of our workforce are women. In which roles are they?
I know.
And I'd like to see it more...
The NHS does that too, They absolutely, the NHS are every bit as bad.
But I'd like to see it more concurrently across all the structures of our businesses, not just in one area. And I think that'd be a big thing for us to do. But where do we start the conversation with people to get them interested? Where do we tell them stories? Is it school? Is it college? Is it where? School.
It's school. So I've got twin boys who are 15 at the moment, and they're heading into work experience this summer. That's the time where you capture people's imagination, because most people, they don't understand the art of the possible in terms of different kind of career pathways. And as we touched on earlier, actually, the generation of people heading into the workplace now, their desires and ambitions and aspirations are very different. I know it's cliche with us sort of talking about Generation X and Generation Z. I know I can't say Z but I know that's where it is, and but actually our needs and desires and wants are very, very different, and so it's lazy of us to assume if we keep on doing more of what we've done before that actually it's going to be successful for us, because it isn't. I know this isn't within construction, but it's a relevant example. So there was a case study in the NHS workforce planning that actually the new consultants coming through, fully qualified consultants, before, maybe 20, 30 years ago, it was about having an NHS practice in order to build your private practice and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But actually, there's a cadre of people, younger people coming through now who want to work the bare minimum hours to maintain the lifestyle outside of work they want to live. So one was a rock climber and one was an avid canoeist. And so they job shared a consultant job with no private practice, and they'd worked out what was the minimum amount of hours they could do to support their lives outside of work. And unless we wake up and think, about our people in school or school leavers and create career paths and tell stories that excite people and unlock that enthusiasm and passion for something, then we can keep getting the same and being disappointed about, oh dear, well, we haven't got enough women in this, or, actually it's really, really hard for us to, we can't fill these posts. That's on us. It is, because actually we've got the opportunity at these, formative years to tell really exciting stories about what a future might be in particular career paths that they won't even have necessarily thought of.
Yeah, and we do loads of this. Like we've got an in the community business through AJ, and we do a lot of these talks. But I sometimes lose focus because I don't feel like anyone else wants to. You feel like, where does this sit in society where people are going to go and talk about these things? Because my daughter's 13 and she gets told about being an influencer and you need tech skills and you only can go into IT. And I feel like the narrative's just all focused around all of this cool stuff. But construction's
cool. I can guarantee for you. So no, I know I keep talking about Lexi. As I say, I haven't spoken to her about it, so she might be really cool.
She's going to be famous soon.
But if you were to follow a day in the life of Lexi, and see what she gets up to and the energy with which she commits to it and the amount of stuff she gets through and the people she inspires, and you created that into because obviously younger people, they want this instant gratification, don't they? If they can't get a message in like 30 seconds, then it's like the idea of watching a whole program is a disaster in our household. So something that's 5 or 10 minutes, no longer than that, but sort of almost does a time lapse of her day and here's her interacting, that's going to speak far more than what you or I could ever say in a PowerPoint presentation of actually this is what it means to be a woman in construction. It's actually see what it's like, see how interesting and exciting it is and how many different things you get involved in and get stuck in with. And I think we don't engage people in a way that meets them at their level.
100%. We're still doing the same things we used to do 20 years ago. The other thing is that the big one that I keep saying at the colleges is people think they have to be a plumber or a plasterer or a joiner to join our industry. There's lots of other routes available that don't involve manual, painting, plastering. So that's interesting, and I think more needs to be done. But the other thing I was going to ask is often and I've not recruited for a while now, but certainly when I was recruiting heavily in exec level, I found that the amount of women versus the amount of men I spoke to, there was a genuine reluctance always. That role doesn't sound like I'd be able to do it before they'd even listened to the responsibilities of the role. And it goes back to the job description kind of, but how do we create compelling journeys for women in our industry, or not even in our industry, in society, so that they feel not just confident to go and do it, but we create an open pathway so that people can develop to chief exec level. And I suppose the second bit of that is kind of what's your journey of that being? Because clearly you've done really well. You've been chief exec of lots of organisations, but what did you do differently that they're not doing in some cases, would you say?
So I think it goes back to what we were saying before, is trying really hard to focus on what you can do and what you can bring, rather than the things that you can't. Because actually, if you could do everything, if you could do 100% of a job before you started, it'd be really boring, wouldn't it? You kind of, I'm easily bored, and actually if I'm not learning something and getting stuck into new stuff, then I'm twiddling my fingers, looking out the window thinking, what's next? So this notion that actually you need to be able to do 100% of the stuff to be a credible candidate is just nuts, quite frankly. So it's really changing the narrative. So there is a little bit of good fortune. I was supported and mentored by some really great people at key strategic points in my career that allowed me to secure my first director job at 29. I again had a couple of really inspiring bosses. David Sloman, Sir David Sloman now, who he's number 2 in the NHS, but he was my boss for 7 years at the Royal Free and encouraged me to apply for my first chief exec job. So there is some of that really structured mentorship and guidance and support from really inspiring individuals as more of a standard. It's part of the package. If you're at assistant director level, or if you're at director level and you're on a talent pathway, then it should be obligatory to have mentorship or coaching or both, or really to help to address some of these so, what's my brand? Who am I? What can I offer? Which actually is not about the organisation type or skill set, because as you will know incredibly well, particularly at executive level, even more so at chief exec level, you spend very little amount of time wading around in the actual specifics of your job description. It's far more about problem solving. I used to joke about it that actually when I was a chief executive, people didn't come to me with great news stories of, there's this thing and we've solved this problem and this is really great. They kick it up to you when either people fail to agree or there isn't an obvious solution. So that's entirely transferable across industries and sectors. So there's mentorship coaching work with people who aspire much earlier on in their career to understand what they're good at, rather than technical tasks or tick boxes on a job description. And then something for either recruiters or organisation. I suggest it's more recruiters, because you guys have got the real deep skill and expertise and experience, whereas hopefully if it's a decent organisation, they're not going to be doing executive recruitment that often, and certainly hopefully not recruiting a chief executive that often. So you need to partner with someone who's really skilled and experienced in that way. But it's just a totally different way of articulating the role, because actually when John and I sat down, this is the chief exec here, and he said what he was looking for was a really experienced operator who had really, really good knowledge of quality improvement, service improvement, standardization, process design, project management, program management. Well, I've got nearly 30 years experience.
You've got all that. But it's people like John, though, and I think there's a lot to be learned here. It's chief executives that don't want women to come into their boards and then behave like the rest of their board. Like when I do a lot of psychometric testing, empathy is very high organisation. In most women, there's so many skills that I don't think we have at leadership level as a man, to be honest, and we have to learn that. And that's why diversity of thought is so important. But I worry about our sector sometimes, because I think a lot of the boards are still very male dominated, and we need to change that.
And even more so you've touched on, I think, probably the thing that I'm most passionate about with women in leadership and women on boards is because sadly there is this feeling, and I don't know if it's just in this country or internationally, that you've got to be a certain type of person to be successful on a board. And actually women are as culpable of this as men. So I've met lots of women in my career that think that the only way they can succeed is if they try to be a man. And the problem is they don't have the testosterone to pull it off. So it's a bit rubbish. But actually, as you quite rightly say, rather than trying to make us all a homogenous blob of what it takes to be a successful executive, we need to celebrate the differences. And actually cultural differences, gender differences, sexuality differences, life experiences differences, they all add colour and more grit, if you like, and quality to your decision making. So rather than try to say, well, I've got to be like this, and that a lot of women do fall into that. It's a really common pitfall, but I've got to be like the 95% of male chief executives to succeed. And that's a disaster, because, as I say, fundamentally we don't have the right chromosomal structure and we don't have enough testosterone to pull it off. But actually we need to celebrate the fact that we are very different, and actually our differences are what strengthen and unite a team and create fabulous leadership.
And I totally agree. And the other thing I'd add to that as well is that I'm seeing more and more at this stage now that empathy is the best quality in leadership. And secondly, surely we've got to be representative of our customers, right?
Agreed.
So if you've only got males on your board, then we're saying basically that only males will buy our properties. That's not true. So I just think that it's a massive topic, but I'm really pleased to see more female leadership. We've got better. We've got a long way to go, and I want to not have to talk about it, to be honest. Like I prefer to get to the point where we're not talking about it, but we have to. So we're running out of time, Casey. So one thing that I just wanted to just ask quickly is, and I love your passion for McCarthy Stone, 9 months in, and you love the business. You can see
I really do,
Yeah, you love the business. What's the blue sky thinking? What do you want to see for the business in the next 5 years? And sort of For the sector, so, like it's important that you have competition. It's important that the retirement living sector grows. But what do you want to see? What would be the absolute look back in 5 years and go, I'm really pleased that that's all happened?
So I think it's the kind of things we've touched on. It's the connection with communities and more broadly in society. So it's the recognition that creating great communities and beautiful homes is one aspect, but it's actually our whole attitude and mindset to older people. We're a rapidly aging population, and actually, we rather than see that as a burden, which I think society sometimes do, is something. All that experience is something to celebrate, and stands us in fabulous stead in terms of the next generation coming through. So I think McCarthy Stone's well positioned around that and has completely understood that we're not a house builder. We're absolutely got a really huge responsibility around trying to lift and raise the profile for older people so that they absolutely can and should speak for themselves, but where they can't, to advocate on their behalf, to make sure the appropriate access to great homes that are appropriate, allow them to live that life well, and not just leave them at the point where you hand over the keys. Actually there is all kind of change and uncertainty as you get older. How can we be a trusted companion along that journey, if you like, to enable someone to age well in a place and not in their chosen place of living, and not to have further disruption as they move forward. So it's really that, and then there's all the mechanics that we've spoken about, becoming much more accessible through multi-tenure rent partnerships with housing associations or with Homes England, to ensure that more people have genuine access and can make informed choice about the opportunities and benefits of retirement living, and then really, really telling the successes of what retirement living can offer. One of the surveys of people in our communities, and I'm going to make sure that, because I want to get this right, is actually from recognised independent wellbeing metrics, someone living in one of our retirement communities demonstrates the same level of well-being as someone 10 years younger than them, not in one of those communities. So it's how that's the responsibility. That's the really fundamental purpose and drive behind a business like McCarthy Stone. And the house building part of it is just one element. It's a really important cog, but it's one cog within a much bigger wheel.
Yeah, and what a lovely way to finish. But one thing that's been a massive observation for me today, I thought I knew McCarthy Stone. So clearly, the reality is, though, that there's a big piece of work to do to get those messages out there. There's a lot more complexity to the business than I ever dreamt of, certainly. And I think, honestly, your passion and enthusiasm for the business is just infectious. And I really, really, really want to look, in 5 years' time and meet again and talk through. I can imagine they're going great places with you at the helm in the Midlands. So thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. And
no, thank you for yours, James. Thank you for reaching out.
And if people want to just reach out to you for any questions about McCarthy Stone, are they happy to on LinkedIn?
Yes, please do. LinkedIn's fine, or you can just drop a note via our website and it'll find its way to me. But also we've got so many great people. I'm just, as I say, a very new cog within a much bigger wheel of really inspiring people. So there would be lots of people really, really happy to answer any questions that people have.
Amazing. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks for your time.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to another episode of The Hip. If you'd like to hear more from us, please be sure to follow us on your favourite podcast platform. We are also running a 30-minute clinic free of charge to any clients that want to recruit in a more inclusive way. For more information, please reach out to us on our website, andersonjames.com.